Alright, this is going to be my answer to the questions I received in my questions vid. I think I'm going to get pretty busy here with work pretty soon, so this is going to be my last chance to do it. Someone wrote me a pretty long comment on Reddit, posted to my video. I guess I won't read his name because I didn't explicitly say I would if it was on Reddit. I have been undergoing the common evolution I have seen in other ANCAPs, such that I have gone from whatever to minarchist to Rothbardian, deontological ANCAP to Friedmanian, consequentialist ANCAP. Namely, my view of morality and rights has changed quite a bit. I was interested in whether or not you have had this similar kind of journey, and or where you are right now. A good indicator, I think, is how one justifies property rights. I don't think there's that many who have explicitly gone through all of those steps, and there's plenty of people who start out as Friedmanites or as objectivists. So there's been a very recent big surge in popularity in the Misesian, Rothbardian, Ron Paul kind of Austro-libertarian. It was always there. It was always a major kind of branch of the philosophy, but it's really come to the fore, I think mostly because of Ron Paul and because of the very effective proselytation of the Mises Institute. Personally, I mean, I knew who Milton Friedman was before, but that wasn't really getting integrated into my political philosophy until I was already an Austro-libertarian. I'm still thinking a lot about these ideas, and so I can't say for sure, where I am. I think I'm to the point where I really like the idea of rights and of objective property rights, but I don't feel comfortable, quote unquote, proving them as factual. So I don't like to base arguments on them. And so that de facto means, if I'm trying to be as rigorous as I can, I have to argue from consequentialist grounds, which, by the way, Rothbard offers excellent arguments for. I mean, his consequentialist arguments, his economic arguments against the state are, second to none, really. There are others that are also just as good as well. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm trying, I would like, without shoehorning, to get, the consequentialism to verify the rights-based approach, but it may not. Who knows? Then he goes on. I have been conflicted for some time about the usefulness and even the morality of going through the political process to forward the cause of liberty. For the 2012 Republican primary, I ran unsuccessfully to be a delegate in PA in my district. I wanted to help Ron Paul win the nomination. Do you think that things like this are, 1, worth the effort, 2, a valid method for increasing liberty, 3, consenting even a little bit to the system? Let's see. If it was worth the effort, that's an impossible question for me to answer. If you being involved in the political process is a major drain on your time, if it takes all your disposable income, or if you're going into debt, or if you can't work, or if it's taken away from your relationships just to garner that tiny, minuscule a bit of political authority, it's probably not. But then again, if you value it that highly, sure. If, on the other hand, you're kind of able to just do it on the side, and it's just kind of like Wednesday night at the club, which is what a lot of politicking is. Just, it's kind of a social thing where they get, people get together and kind of hang out. Fine. Is it consenting to the system a little bit? It depends. It is, but we're all tainted in that regard. I mean, we all have driver's licenses and drive on the roads and blah blah blah. And none of us are living in hermits and can plausibly say we have no acquiescence whatsoever for the government. So I don't think that by going through the normal rounds you're doing much worse, unless you start rhetorically speaking in terms of absolute state power or acquiescence to state power. If your rhetoric is consistently good, then I think that you're not doing any worse. And if you're in a position where lots of people are listening to you, you're actually doing better. It is a cost benefit analysis. I tend to think that it's mostly not worth a ton of effort. In most cases, there are exceptions. I mean, I give money to Justin Amash because he had a very good shot of winning, and he's pretty good rhetorically, so it was worth the effort. But there's getting to be quite a few Liberty candidates out there, and most of them are not in a really good position in terms of their chances. You know, if they're running as a libertarian, they have essentially zero chance in almost anywhere, probably anywhere. You know, it's kind of sad when you see these efforts like Bednarik or Karen Kwiatkowski, and they're running even for congressional seats, and they're getting, you know, 2-3%, which is amazingly good for libertarians, but it's kind of clearly wasted effort in that regard. So that's up to you. I made a video called titled "Politics as a Hobby," where I kind of talk about that. Then he goes on. Then there's also the notion of having Ron Paul be elected and then having economic problems during his term caused by his statist policies before his election might turn people away from libertarianism. First of all, it's mute. Ron Paul is not going to be president unless someone else gets elected and has him be the vice president or something, which is highly unlikely. Although he is healthier than Dick Cheney, so who knows, maybe it's not possible. The libertarians are kind of screwed if we do, screwed if we don't. Libertarianism is already blamed. You know, the idea of free market anyway is blamed by the left for everything. It's kind of this weird thing. Well, they'll spend all day saying, oh, it's so great we have all these government policies, and it's so great that we don't have a free market, that the reason we have a good life is because the government has intervened and given us this, that, and the other. But then when a problem happens, it's, well, this is because of the problems with free market capitalism, or this is because of deregulation. So they kind of have their cake and eat it too. And you know, we had George Bush as president in 2008, and an ever expanding Federal Register and federal budget, and it's just like they pretend like Ron Paul had been president that whole time, when he's clearly a gadfly who has no, is not in control of the government. And he gets dismissed as that, but then when there's a problem, his ideology is to blame. So it's true what you're saying, but it would be true whether he was elected or not. I had planned to throw at least some support behind Rand Paul, though I hope his appeal to more moderate and traditional conservative Republicans means I won't have to try as hard. I had some reservations about Ron. No one's perfect, and Rand seems even less savory in some areas, though he is more able to get the message of liberty across to those who may never experience it. Yeah, it's all true. Rand is rhetorically not as good as his father. I am prepared to entertain the idea, perhaps even likely, that he is a sheep in wolf's clothing, that he's considerably more libertarian than he lets on, and that he is doing this for political ends. I think that's possible, but I could be wrong about that. Also, there's the power where he is a powerful senator now. The stresses that's going to put on his personality are immense, not to mention the potential bribery or blackmail that could be levied against him for being in that position. So I am very hesitant to support something that I only have my intuition to consider the possibility that maybe he's legit. I think it's a good case. I mean, look, he's Ron's son. He knew Rothbard personally. As a senator, he's been the best senator we've had in a very long time, certainly the best one we have now. But it is disconcerting. He has said many things that are upsetting, and it's hard to say, are these just, is he throwing a bone to the warmongering or into Israel or whatever, and I don't know what's in his heart, and he doesn't have the track record of his father. I mean, again, I don't know what's in Ron's heart. Maybe the whole thing is a huge joke for Ron, but it'd be awfully amazing for him to be still laughing at the same joke 40 years on. But I leave it to people to decide for themselves. We'll see. I'm sure he's going to run for president, so we'll be talking a lot about Rand. Even if he didn't run for president, we'd be talking a lot about Rand. But okay. Someone asked me to read these links, and I didn't read them. I'm sorry. But he poses two questions, and I'll answer them without reading anyway. Is it worth time to continue to convince the masses to adopt values they seem to obviously reject? Yes, I agree that they obviously do reject a lot of them, but not all of them do. It's amazing how many people, you'd think that by now everyone has heard about anarcho-capitalism, and if they're not anarcho-capitalists, it's because they rejected the ideas. Or I just Facebook friended a guy who is actively as hard as possible promoting Rand Paul. I mean, creating Rand Paul fan pages. If you type Rand Paul into Google, this guy is running several Rand Paul, and not just he's a conservative who believes in America, but he's a libertarian. Big government's bad, blah 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 blah. It's a pretty principled guy, right? So I'm talking to him on Facebook, and I'm like, "So are you an ANCAP?" And he had no idea what that was. He'd never even heard the term. He didn't know who Rothbard was. He didn't know who Mises was. So he's an internet savvy guy. I mean, he's running websites, and he's only 18, but he did not know what ANCAP was. So if we stop preaching, if we stop reaching out to the masses, then we're going to miss all the people like that and all the other people who maybe aren't even so close already politically, but who just haven't heard about it. There is nothing to be lost by continuing to evangelize, other than your time. And I don't know what thing you could possibly do that would have a better return in terms of moving the society. There's still plenty of people out there who haven't heard the message. There are lots of other people who have, and it just takes time. Everybody has a progression. It's very rare for the person who, I just found a website, I completely changed my mind in 8 hours. That's kind of what happens to non-skeptical people when they become 9/11 truthers. Most people, it takes time, and so to keep putting it out there, there's two reasons to do that. Well, I don't know if there's just two, but if we ever did want to change the entire society, so to speak, the more the better. You don't have to have the majority that's democratic, lies. A minority can influence the society enough. As there gets to be more, there it becomes less radical. But let's assume that it's not impossible to convince enough people for the entire society. You still want to evangelize to the entire society, because if you want to have a micro society, if you want to have like a free state project or a concentration of everybody who does share those values in a certain area, which I think has an awful lot of promise, if you get enough people, you need to draw those from the rest of society. So if the Free State Project just said, we're not going to evangelize, we're not going to talk to anybody, if no one ever had, there would be no Free State Project right now. And they're going to get their members from the rest of society. The other thing is, if, let's just assume that free society is impossible, or at least it's impossible now and it can never happen. The more people who are libertarians, it's a better gadfly and a better it's a better check against more depredations. Is it the best? No. Is it nice to be able to say we have a terrible system, but at least there's the potential to maybe raise up enough of a fuss to maybe stop the next terrible thing? No, that's not ideal, but that's better than not. So I don't think there's any reason not to. Do you think a small ANCAP city nation or micronation could realistically be founded within your lifetime? I definitely think they could. There's several different plausible scenarios where this could happen. The breakdown of a state. There's lots of states that are on the cusp of, susceptible to doing this. There's a lot of states that don't have the wherewithal to exert themselves so greatly. I think also, when we're talking about libertarianism, we're talking about basically a whole bunch of rich Westerners. I mean, we don't consider ourselves rich, but relative to third world people, we are. And a lot of third world nations, especially true in Latin America, but it's true in Africa and Asia as well. A lot less so in Asia than previously, but still to a point. They want to attract foreign capital and foreign expertise. And, I think with these free cities movements with Patrick Friedman, when they are going and they're talking to like Honduras or Nicaragua, we see it as they're trying to enact this big libertarian experiment. But I think the Latin Americans probably see it differently. I think they see it as more of a, this is potential investment. They're not seeing, they're looking at it as, look, we're going to get all these skilled workers. That this is what they're imagining. It's not necessarily what they're going to get. And so they are much more receptive to the idea, I think, than the radicalism of the philosophy behind it would suggest. So I think it's plausible. There's any number of scenarios, and probably some that I can't even imagine, all of which are possible, which is not to say that it's overwhelmingly likely, but just that I don't think that we can pass it off. And there's de facto things that can happen too. Like a society can kind of grow up and the nearest state might just not have a lot of practical control. If one of these projects kicked off, would you support it or participate? That's totally circumstantial. I don't see myself getting off a boat with a machete on the coast of some jungle infested, hellhole and building a new frontier. But who knows? That's very dependent on circumstances. My question, are you at all worried about being targeted by the state as a result of your anti-state videos? Thanks for all the great videos. Not really. I mean, to be where I am, you assume that the government's evil and that it can do just about anything, and mass genocides and persecutions of its domestic population is kind of like the bread and the butter of somebody like me. So I acknowledge that exists quite explicitly. How likely it is, you could say it's happening right now, but it's very, very much happening on the margins. Even the worst case scenarios which happen. And I'm not saying that to say, well, so it can't get worse. I think that at this point I'm such a small fish that there's no reason for them to really care that much. There's plenty of people bigger than me, more threatening than me. The other thing is, not being silent is not really a defense. They're watching everybody. They don't. Their plans aren't, well, who's speaking out? Let's go get them. It's everyone's a potential threat, and it's now admitted that they're spying on everybody, not just me or not just the activists, not just the Adam Kokeshes of the world. They're spying on everybody, and they see everybody as a threat. And doing nothing and hoping it blows over is pretty much the worst strategy you possibly can have. So. Maybe someday I'll regret it, but I think rationally I don't think I'm risking that much by doing this. All right, these are comments, so I will read these out. Nublian asks, can you do more book videos like what you read and what you recently bought? I can. I have a couple actually that I recorded the last time I was at work back in May, and I just have not uploaded them because I've been having some camera problems. But yeah, I have some that I could upload. I always feel redundant doing that because in my recommendation vids, I mentioned them already, and so to go into more detail, I don't know, I just don't like to. But other people have asked me to do that, so perhaps I will. Internet blowing, also confused with your channel name, but anyway, in your opinion, why does the idea of communism appeal to some people but not others? I think people have different personality types, whether that's nature or nurture. Part of it definitely is nature, or part of it's definitely nurture. I mean, if you're just brought up in a certain way, it seems. I think that when it comes to libertarianism, there's clear evidence that the people who are most susceptible to it do have certain unusual character traits. Not everyone who's a libertarian matches those character traits, but a lot of people do. I wouldn't be surprised if communism was similar, but I don't know for sure. I think another reason communism is so effective is that it relies very much on rational ignorance. It promises a whole lot, and it seems plausible enough if you don't really think about it at all. And so, the intellectual rigor that it would require to debunk it, so to speak, isn't worth the nice feelings you get just agreeing with it. It's the same as when you go and vote for a politician. It feels good, because you like their speeches, and that's easier than looking at their actual record and trying to actually decide. Ken Dog McAwesome, I always did wonder, why do you have that American flag there? No reason really. There's just tons of junk down there, and it's just, one of the problems with capitalism is you just acquire all this stuff. There's no decoration I didn't put there. It was there before I moved in, and I just never saw I never took it down. So I don't know. Don't read too much into it. Seduzian, congrats on the subs. My question: which one of your guns are your favorite? Of all my guns, I think the one that if I had to pick one to keep, it would be my Mauser German rifle. It was actually built in Spain in the 50s, but I have a Mauser bolt-action 308 rifle, and that's just the most reliable. It's the one I'm most comfortable with. I have several really nice semi-automatic rifles that I like, and I have shot, and I really do enjoy them, but they are just not quite as reliable, and it might be that I don't take good enough care of them. I do maintenance on them, but semi-automatics are just a little bit more touchy than bolt actions are, and they're bigger and they're heavier, and I'm not that Mauser is just that's a gun made to be used, and I've shot it more, and I don't know, I just really like it. Now if maybe someday I get a lot better at the other ones, maybe I'll change my mind, but yeah. And that's ironic too, because it's absolutely the cheapest gun I have. I've spent upwards of $1,700 on rifles before, and that Mauser I bought for $200. So people are like, you can spend a lot of money on guns, but you don't have to. You can get a good bolt-action rifle that's used, and that's all you have to have, really. So I got that at a gun show, by the way, so it's a good reason to go to gun shows. And you just walk around, and I've just bought a couple other guns at one, and I haven't used them yet, but I suspect they're actually pretty similar in how in their quality. They're old, they're kind of beat up, but they work. And I mean, that stuff is not. People are going. The high dollar stuff is new, and it's semi-automatic. It's all this black, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But then you pay a lot, and if you don't have a ton of money, $1,400 for a new AR or whatever. Not that I'd ever buy an AR. That's a lot, but you can go and get Lee Enfield or a Springfield or a Remington 700 or there's so many, a Marlin. I mean, they have bolt-action hunting rifles where they've made 50 million of them, and they're that good. They're popular because they're good. So if you have to get one, that's what I'd get. You made a reference, Johnny Briggs asked, you made a reference to the singularity in a recent video. I'm not sure if you mentioned that before. Can you give me your quick take on the whole thing? And what would the state do with technology like that? Or would AI make the state obsolete? Thanks again for everything you do in the movement, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, the idea behind a singularity is that it would make humanity more or less either obsolete, or it would integrate all of humanity into its consciousness. And if that was the case, if AI ever achieves that level of omnipotence, it wouldn't technically be omnipotence, whatever. Yeah, then the state would definitely be irrelevant. There is a danger, I think, with technology, that the state, before it gets to that point, will try and use it to its own advantages and cause all kinds of problems. And so, that's what we have to worry about. I think that a singularity is probable, but I'm not technically knowledgeable enough to really judge, because there are questions about how the intelligence of machines develops, and if that ever is going to be what we actually recognize as intelligence. And maybe it is, and so it's going to happen. But it's funny, we talk about how much more computing power there is, but it doesn't seem computers don't seem really any more human. If they're 100,000 times or 1,000,000 times smarter now than they were 30 years ago, do they seem 1,000,000 times more human? And the answer is no. But maybe we're getting there. I don't know. There's Moore's law, but I guess even Moore's law has problems. Like the more, even though it doubles every 18 months in computing power, like the heat increases, and I don't know. I think it's possible. I'm always worried about the state of using technology. But if some superhuman intelligence was actually created, then the state would be in the same position as the rest of us, and that would be more or less at the mercy of whatever that entity would. And most of science fiction is kind of focused on a dystopian element, like, okay, so then this superhuman intelligence decides to get rid of humans, and if it was smarter than humans, then fuck, we'd be in really deep shit if that was to happen. But I don't know if we can really speculate about what the motives of such a being would be like. I mean, even if we assume, let's have a human that has superhuman intelligence, what would that be like? We're not really sure. And this wouldn't even be a human, so, I don't know. But, I think it's well within the realm of possibility that it could happen. Jesse Verne, my question is, what do you think about going to war in Syria? You have a very long videos, and I personally love them, but I can't. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not an expert on Syria, but here's a couple things you need to know. Syria has a very, very mixed society. It's not homogeneous, it's heterogeneous. And there isn't a single ethnic group that is the majority. The largest single ethnic group are the Sunni Muslims. And that's even, there's categories within that, but they're many of them are politically motivated and kind of, they work together, but they're not a majority. They're probably, something less than 50%. But then within the minorities, you have the Shiite Muslims, you have the Druze, you have Kurds. They're the Alawites, who we usually consider them Muslim, but a lot of Muslims don't consider them Muslim, whatever. And a whole bunch of other ones. And basically, there's a common theme in societies like this, where there's one group that would be the biggest, but then there's a whole bunch of smaller groups that together are bigger. It's very often the smaller ones get together and form a united, cooperative unit to keep from being oppressed from the larger of the larger group. This is what happened in Iraq, for instance. So Saddam Hussein ruled that country. He was from the Sunni, who were a minority. Most of the people were Shiite, kind of the opposite in Syria. And as a result, all the Jews, all the Christians, not all the Kurds, that's a little bit different, I guess, in that case, they were aligned with him because they didn't want to be oppressed by the Sunni majority. Most of the minorities, or everyone's a minority, but the smaller ethnic groups in Syria support the Assad regime. You call him a dictator, I guess, but he holds political power because a lot of people want him there, because they are afraid that if the Sunnis take over, then they will be persecuted. And many of the Sunnis, who are the Syrian rebels, are kind of explicitly saying that that's actually their goal, that they're going to do that. So Assad is a Shiite himself, which is why he's aligned with Iran, because they're Shiites. So that's a big mess. We shouldn't be involved. Al-Qaeda is Sunni, by the way. Like, Al-Qaeda hates Shiites. Like, they're up there. When they say death to America, they usually also say death to Iran as well. Considering the size and the amount of books on your current reading list, as seen in your last video, it's no longer my last video, is it safe to assume that you're normally going through such a voluminous reading list? How meticulous are you while reading, underlining, highlighting, writing notes? I myself still read quite a bit, blah, 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 blah. I'm not a speed reader. I'm not that fast of a reader. It's rare that I'll read 100 pages unless it's a book a day, unless the book has, lots of spaces and pictures and and graphs and stuff. I think I actually am probably a slower than average reader. How much I read, it fluctuates enormously. It's odd when I'm on vacation and I have lots of free time. I'll often not read anything. I veg out like completely. It's very, that's something I need to work on. When I'm at work, I tend to read a whole lot more, and I can consistently do 50 to 100 pages, even if it's pretty thick text. Even if it's a lot of words and not a lot of space. And that's kind of what I aim for. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes, work is too demanding or I'm just too tired. But then on the other hand, every once in a while, you really get into a book. Some books just kind of flow through your hands, and some it's like eating vegetables. Some books, even though I like the material and I find it interesting, it's like you have to chew every page, and it just takes a long time. And others, it's like turn. I never underline, I never highlight, and I never write notes. And there's not a reason for that. It's just I don't do that. I've never reread a book, and I'm not going to pretend like I absorb or remember everything in every book